After nearly 3 months without seeing any action due to the devastating floods in KwaZulu-Natal that forced the South African Rally Raid Championship organisers to cancel round number 2, the series returned with a vengeance with one of the most iconic races on the African continent. The new round 2 was the big one, the Toyota Gazoo Racing SA 1000 Desert Race. We've already shown you the first 200 kilometres of this grueling race. Here is the rest of it. All the action brought to you by Toyota, Ford, Gulfstream and Pirelli. For the second year in succession, the Kalahari capital of Uppington played host to the toughest race in the South African Rally Raid Championship. But with COVID-19 restrictions a thing of the past for the foreseeable future, race fans returned to the side of the roads to witness some of the best motorsport action that South Africa has to offer. And the more than 40 cars and crews that were entered into the race are truly world-class. In fact, not only have quite a few of the South African teams already competed in the world-famous Dakar Rally, but event sponsors Toyota Gazoo Racing SA has earned their second overall victory earlier this year. But this is Africa, and here in Uppington, there were a number of crews all gunning for glory. We've already seen a short Pirelli qualifying race on the Friday morning of the event, followed by the first loop that totaled more than 170 kilometers of racing. Unfortunately for Toyota Gazoo Racing SA, their star driver and defending champion Henk Ladekan was forced to the sidelines after an altercation with a big rock. Ladekan, who was the first car on the road, went on to complete day 1, but with all the time lost, the champion's run of bad luck in the desert continued.
It was a fast left-hander, long left sweep, and there was no instruction, nothing on the GPS, and all of a sudden the road kinked to the left and there was a massive hole with a lot of massive rocks on the outside of the corner, and we were the unfortunate ones that collected the biggest rock first.
But fortunately for Toyota, they still had 3 more crews in the race, and after the first day's racing, 2 of those were at the very top of the standings. The name at the very top, Janelle de Villiers.
You know, the first part was very rough, the section we used this morning, so not that much fun to drive, but the second part of the loop was really, really nice.
His overall lead was just less than 2 minutes over teammate Guy Bodrell. A feature of the South African Rally Raid Championship has always been the bitter rivalry between Toyota Gazoo Racing and the NWM Ford Castrol team, with brothers Lance and Gareth Woolridge behind the wheels of their Ford Rangers. After day 1, Lance was still within striking distance and third in class, but unfortunately for Gareth, his steed suffered from technical problems, dropping him way down the order. These guys were all behind the wheels of cars in the new class for 2022, the T1 Plus, the same class of the car that won Dakar in January. But for the desert race, a new class saw the light for these fearsome big-wheel but rear-wheel drive Century Racing CR6 buggies. The class is called T1.2, and 2021 desert race winner Brian Baragwanath was leading the way.
It's a tough fight against the turbo engines. I think we're lacking a bit of power, but other than that, you know, we're trying every strategy we can, and we're putting the power down wherever we can.
The so-called production car category also features 2 more classes, with former champion and off-road racing stalwart Chris Visser finding himself at the front of the field in only his first outing since jumping from the Hilux to the futuristic-looking Redline Revo.
Yeah, it was much wetter than last year, and I must say with a small wheel car, it actually digs in a little bit into the wet sand.
And lastly, in the final class that make up the production vehicle category, it was youngster Jaden Els who led the way in his King Price Extreme Renault Duster. So this is how things stood up after the first day of the 2022 Toyota Gazoo Racing SA 1000 Desert Race. Els was ahead of Rose by some margin in Class T. Visser was the clear leader in the Class T1s, ahead of a determined Eben Besson from the newly formed Team Hilux Rally Raid and the Nissan Navara of Daniel Schroeder. Century Racing team leader Brian Baragwanath was the pick of the bunch in the Class T1.2s, ahead of Lance Trethui, Malcolm Koch and the 2 visiting French pairings in the form of the Panagiottis and Galpin. At the very top, it was all systems go for de Villiers, who was leading his sponsor's race, with teammate Bottrell in second, ahead of Lance Woolridge and Shamir Variawa. Fans of the South African Rally Raid Championship will know that the sport also makes provision for the so-called special vehicles. And here it was former champion Tim Howes who managed to edge ahead of fellow Italian Trace Price-Moore in Class A.
Quite sticky and quite hard work in a two-wheel drive, but it's the same for everyone. So it was good fun though.
With the roads being dug up due to all the heavy machinery, it could not have been too much fun to negotiate the rough conditions from behind the wheel of a Can-Am Maverick side-by-side, as they are called. But the Hydro Power Equipment Maverick of Jeff Minnitt survived and had a good lead of 5 minutes in the Class Gs. Here's the confirmation of Minnitt's advantage over the defending champions, the Lani brothers in Class G, with the Mostards rounding out the provisional podium. Howes had the upper hand in the Class A's over Trace Price-Moore, with Sandra Labuschagne-Jonk down in third. The Toyota Gazoo Racing SA 1000 Desert Race is a marathon event, so even after a full days of racing, we still had nearly 800 kilometers and another 2 days of racing still to go. This was the Saturday of the event, and as the game is played in golf, Saturday is moving day. At exactly 8 o'clock, the flag was waved to signal the start of the first of the day's 2 racing loops. The starting order is determined by the overall standings, so as race leaders, it was up to Janelle de Villiers and Dennis Murphy to open up the road, followed by teammates Bottrell and Vasey Lyle, the first of the Century CR6s in the hands of Brian Baragwanath and Leonard Kramer, and the NWM Ford Castrol Ranger of Lance Woolridge and Alvin Vonk. To be first on the road is almost always a disadvantage, but on the Saturday of the Toyota Gazoo Racing SA 1000 Desert Race, it wasn't. The Saturday route was an exact repeat of the roads used on the Friday loop, so de Villiers and Murphy had a very good idea of where they were going, but so did Bottrell, Baragwanath, Woolridge, Variawa and the rest of the chasing pack. If anything, it was an advantage to be closer to the front of the field, as the big, heavy and powerful cars were making mincemeat of the soft Kalahari sand, leaving a trail of devastation behind them. And it was in these conditions that the battle for the Class G honours was raging between the gaggle of Can-Am Mavericks, the side-by-side class. Overnight leaders Jeff Minnitt and Gerrit Snyman held onto their lead until halfway through the second loop, but a bent sump plate and a few punches saw them lose more than 2 hours as they dropped from first to third in class. Newcomers Glenn Turon and Craig Galvin were quick to grab the opportunity and moved up into second place in their first ever desert race. But the men on the move were the father and son pairing of Werner and Ian Mostert in their Motonetics Racing Can-Am. The Mosterts started the day way down the order, but a long day meant plenty of opportunities to make up time, which is exactly what they did. Their lead after more than 7 hours worth of racing was now a comfortable 32 minutes. Over at the big-wheeled monsters in Class A of the special vehicle category, it was a bit of a struggle for LC Diaga and Rickers Hutting, who tried to make up for lost time on the day before. They reached the end of Saturday in 5th position with quite a large gap between themselves and the Farmers Meat striker of the current 4th place pairing in the form of Louis de Prier and Chris Visser Jr., who was back in the race after failing to complete the Friday's route. With severe time penalties for all these crews, the only ones in with a chance of desert race victory was Sandra Labuschagne-Jonk, now with stand-in navigator Zahir Badania, alongside her in the KEX Racing Bat Viper as a result of husband Jaco picking up a stomach bug, and 2 more bats in the hands of Trace Price-Moore and Sean Braithwaite, and Timmy Howes and Gary Campbell. The gap between the lady driver and the battle ahead of her grew too big though, so it turned into a duel between the Italians, Howes and Price-Moore. It was a tense battle in which Howes lost the lead when he rolled the bat on the first of the day's racing loops, but the damage was minimal and they regained the lead on loop number 2, setting the scene for a great showdown on the Saturday of the race.
I think we're going okay, and we've just got to keep it on 4 wheels for the next 400 Ks and we'll be good.
Confirmation of the Mosterts leading Class G in their Can-Am Racing Maverick after stopping the clocks on 7 hours and 21 minutes, a full 32 minutes and 17 seconds faster than Glenn Turon and Craig Galvin, with overnight leaders Minnitt and Snyman dropping down the order. Despite the crash, the name of Howes remained at the top of the Class A leaderboard with a 4-minute and 5-second lead ahead of Trace Price-Moore and Sandra Labuschagne-Jonk completing the provisional Class A podium. And on to the Day 2 action in production vehicle categories we go. The sheer amount of different vehicles spread out across the various classes that compete in this category is solid proof of the quality of competition that we have in this series. At first, trying to make sense of all the different classes may sound complicated, but in the end, they are all fast cars driven by some of the best drivers in the country and the world. Class T is for four-wheel drive cars with a solid rear axle. It has provided a training ground for many years, and it still does. After nearly 7 hours of flat-out desert racing, 17-year-old Jaden Els and Navi Armand de Toy retained their lead in the King Price Extreme Renault Duster. Els only recently swapped the tarmac of circuit racing for the dirt, and a class victory at the desert will mean a lot to the talented youngster. He enjoyed a healthy class lead over a pair of NWM Ford Rangers, the first one driven by Christo Rose and Arno Olivier, and the second by husband and wife, Bernard and Manette Johnston. Also on the scoreboard, after failing to finish the Friday's proceedings, was the father and son crew of Johan and Sean van Staden in the KEC Racing Renault Duster, who rounded out the class. Cars in Class T1 are pretty similar to the ones in Class T, but with a few mods, such as independent rear suspension. It's an official FIA class as well, and one that has a host of fast cars in the form of Toyotas, Fords, Redline VK56s, Redline Revos, Nissan Navaras, and even a Mercedes. So far, veteran racer Chris Visser in his new Redline Revo was the one out in front, but the former champion had a tough day at the office that started with 2 punches early on. Another puncher and suspension damage forced the former desert race winner to throw in the towel. He was initially chased down by Eben Besson and Leander Pinar in the new Team Hilux Rally Raid Toyota Hilux, but the Mpumalanga businessman also suffered from a series of punches, 5 to be precise, a problem if you don't carry that many spare wheels. Fortunately for Besson, both Visser and Philip Buerta in the Redline VK56 were kind enough to each give up a spare wheel. Sportsmanship indeed. This did mean that someone else was going to be leading the class at the end of the day though, and that someone was German driver Daniel Schroeder and Ryan Bland in their Nissan Navara. While everyone was having issues, Schroeder kept it clean to finish a grueling day in the provisional class lead.
Yeah, we'll try to keep the momentum going and see what we can do for the finish of the race.
The German had a comfortable margin over the Good Samaritans, Philip Buerta and Roelof Janssen van Vuren, who luckily didn't need their other wheel to reach the end of the day. Better yet, they were second in class now. But they had the Team Hilux Rally Raid car of debutants, Fischer and Bertus Blicknote, breathing down their necks, less than 4 minutes behind. It was quite close between the majority of Class T1 cars, as despite their puncher woes, Besson was still within striking distance of his teammates. But he also had to fend off the challenge by Johan de Bruyn and Gerard Skitter in another Redline VK56, with Gary Berthold and Jean Moore still trying to make up for some lost time in their Hilux and rounding out the top 6 in Class T1s. Throughout the tough days racing, it became very clear that the bigger wheels were most definitely providing an advantage in these rough and sandy conditions. So the fight at the top was going to be between the 4-wheel drive Class T1 Plus cars and the 2-wheel drive buggies in the new class T1.2. Vryburg businessman Malcolm Koch and Jaco van Aert started the day 3rd in class, but the JCP Steel Supplies CR6 suffered from a few punches and dropped to 5th, some way ahead of teammates Ernst Roberts and Henry Kerner, who were recovering from their day 1 woes. The gap between Koch and 4th place Dewald van Breda and Johan de Toy was now around 10 minutes, which sounds like a lot, but considering they've done all but 7 hours, it wasn't the end of the world. Up ahead, in current 3rd place in class, the French husband and wife pairing of Yannick and Valerie Panagiotis were doing a great job on their first ever outing on South African soil. But unless the top 2 were going to be running into trouble, 3rd was as high as they would be going. That's because the 2 Century CR6s at the top of the class leaderboard at the end of day number 2 belonged to Lance Trethewey and Rodney Burke and teammates Brian Baragwanath and Leonard Kramer. Trethewey is an old hand at this game and has won several special vehicle titles, but he is still fairly new to the CR6. And then there was Brian Baragwanath, the overall winner of last year's desert race. BB is a rare talent behind the wheel, and it once again showed as he emerged from the day as the clear leader in Class T1.2, despite hitting some trouble along the way.
The second loop was no problems, flat out. We're still fighting to keep pace, but it's all good.
At the very front of the field, it was all systems go for Toyota Gazoo Racing SA as their crews were leading their sponsored event. something that often goes wrong in a phenomenon known as the sponsor's curse. But for now, it was all smooth sailing for Janelle de Villiers and Dennis Murphy, who completed the tough day with an overall race and class lead of nearly 5 minutes.
So thanks to the team for all their hard work. We did a lot of setup changes again after the Dakar, so it seems to be working nicely.
Teammates Guy Bottrell and Simon Vasey-Lyle would have been pleased with their second overall position in their second ever desert race. The multiple rally champion was clearly finding his feet in the world of cross-country racing. It was far from over though. Toyota enjoyed a lockout of the current Class T1 Plus positions, with Shamir Varioa and Donnie Stassen occupying third place after a clean and fast run on Saturday. Sadly, the fight between Ford and Toyota never materialized when the NWM Ford Castrol Ranger of Lance Woolridge and Alvin Vonk developed an engine issue that forced them to retire on the first of the day's racing loops. This opened the door for the new Team Hilux Rally Raid car of the Horn brothers to move up into fourth in their first ever outing in the T1 Plus class, whilst Gareth Woolridge and Boyd Dreyer and Henk Larachan and Brett Cummings were carving their way through the field after their early setbacks. When the dust settled, it was young Jaden Els at the top of the Class T leaderboard, ahead of Christo Rose in second and Johan van Staden in third. The Class T1 leaderboard was a busy one, with Daniel Schroeder's name at the top ahead of Philip Buerta and the Blicknort brothers rounding out the provisional podium. In the Class T1.2, it was all about 2021 Desert Race winner Brian Baragwanath with a comfortable gap over Trithui and the visiting Panagiotti couple. And there it is, Janelle de Villiers with a 4-minute and 53-second lead over teammate Guy Bottrell with Shamir Varioa, completing an all-Toyota podium in the Class T1 Plus. And then this was it, the final day of the 2022 Toyota Gazoo Racing SA 1000 Desert Race here in the Kalahari capital of Uppington. The day would determine the outcome of South Africa's toughest race. Who would come out on top? Will de Villiers keep it clean? Will Brian Baragwanath pull the rabbit out of the hat to claim his second consecutive desert race win? Or will Bottrell rise to the occasion? In between these questions and all the answers were 187 kilometers of mostly fresh tracks in the Kalahari sand. The loop will be tackled twice to bring the total distance covered over the 3 long days of racing to almost 1,000 kilometers, exactly as the name suggests. 2 days ago, 42 cars took to the starters' orders, and after 2 days and 600 kilometers of racing, just 30 cars spread across 2 categories and 6 classes remained to take on the final day. Not all of them would make it to the end of the race, but let's count them down one by one. Let's start with the fight for podium positions in the Class G for the side-by-side vehicles, where Jeff Minnett was setting the pace for most of the weekend until some issues on the Saturday that dropped him down to third, behind newcomer Glenn Turon. These two had a very good scrap throughout the final day, with Minnett beating Turon to the second step of the podium. But it was always going to be for second place, as once Werner and his son Ian Mostert smelt the opportunity of victory, they were out of there. A great way for the former class champion to return to winning ways, and an even better way for his son to start his stint as a navigator. There were 3 finishers in the mighty Class A of the special vehicle category, the same amount of steps left on the podium. When the flag was waved, it was the Farmers Meat striker of Luit de Pria and Chris Visser Jr. who claimed the final spot, some distance between the fight for victory between Timmy Howes and Trace Price-Moore. The latter tried his best, but in the end, it was the former champion Howes who was simply too fast on the day to take an emphatic victory on the toughest race of the year. This is the one podium on the South African racing calendar that you do want to spray the bubbly from. It's the race that everyone wants to win, and that's precisely what both the Mosterts did in Class G, as well as Tim Howes and Gary Campbell in Class A.
Yeah, and it has been a brilliant race. From start to finish, we had a few hiccups every now and again, but nothing too serious.
No, that was awesome. It was a great event. We thoroughly enjoyed it today.
In the end, a margin of nearly an hour for Howes over Price Moore, with Louis Dupree rounding out the top three. The Mostards ended at the top of the Gs ahead of Minute and Tehran. And onto the cars with tin roofs and windscreens, or the production car category, where 17-year-old Jaden Els drove superbly to claim his first Class T victory, and what a place to do it at, the Fiat 1000 Desert Race. The King Price Extreme Renault Duster emerged victorious over the KEC racing version of Johan and Sean van Staden, who recovered well to claim the second step of the podium, ahead of the NWM Motorsports Racing Ranger of Christo Rose and Arno Olivier.
Big thanks to my mechanics, my dad for prepping the car, and then for all the sponsors.
And what a fight it turned out to be in the Class T1s, where Johan de Bruyn survived all the punches in the world to reach the end of his first ever desert race. But there was some daylight between him and fifth place, Gary Berthold, who recovered well after his early problems on the event. And speaking of problems, Irben Besson also had his fair share, but battled through to bring his Hilux home in fourth place. Whilst this was a bitter pill to swallow for the Team Hilux Rally Raid crew, their teammates in a second Hilux had every reason to smile. The boys from Witbank, brothers Fouchier and Bertus Blicknote, not only finished their first ever cross-country race, but they managed to do so whilst filling the third step of the podium. They came agonizingly close to finishing second though, but that step belonged to Philip Buerta and Roelof Janssen van Vuren, who didn't set a foot wrong for the well-deserved second place in their Redline Motorsport VK56. Try as they may, there was nothing any of the Class T1 runners could do to match the pace of the man that would end up on top. A solid performance for young German driver Daniel Schroeder and Navi Ryan Bland, who literally did not set 1 foot wrong the whole weekend.
Obviously, the weekend actually went very well for us. We didn't have a lot of problems. I mean, it's a long race and a lot of stuff can happen, a lot of rocks you can hit.
In the new Class T 1.2, the French pairing of Yannick and wife Valerie Panagiotis started the final day in third place, and this is where they wanted to finish. It was good enough for them to reach their actual goal, and that was to win the Road to Dakar, the race within a race, and the race that sees them win a free entry into the world's toughest race, the Dakar. Valerie clearly had every reason to enjoy her visit to South Africa.
The people are very, very nice. And all the organization is very, very nice. So it was a very, very beautiful experience, yeah.
So the big dog, Lance Trethuri, was unchallenged as he started the day in second, and that's exactly where he and Rodney Burke finished in the King Price Extreme CR6, yet another trophy for the big man from KZN. But the question fans wanted to have answered was this: could Brian Baragwanath repeat his performance from last year and win the desert race outright? He started the day in third place overall and had every intention, but his progress was halted when a rock caused some damage to the car. So the Century Racing CR dropped to fourth overall, but still topped the Class T 1.2 standings.
Yeah, you know, we had the podium today. We were lying third. That we were going to settle for third, and then we hit a rock again today and damaged the front suspension. So we had to stop and fix it, and that was just enough to put us to fourth.
And finally, we're getting closer to the answer of who won the actual race. Sadly for him, it wasn't the Ford of Gareth Woolridge, but he did well to score a fifth place in Class T1 Plus, and fourth in class meant that the Malalan brothers, Johan and Werner Horn, came agonizingly close to the podium finish in their new Team Hilux Rally Raid T1 Plus, a great result for the stalwarts of the sport. But with the Horns finishing fourth in class and Brian Baragwanath finishing fourth overall, it was easy to work out that the 2022 Toyota Gazoo Racing SA Desert Race was going to be one to remember for sponsors Toyota, as they were on their way to fill all three steps of the winner's podium. When the dust settled, Shamir Voriowa did what he does best as they reached the finish line in a fine third overall, yet another podium for the successful desert racer. This meant that Guy Bottrell had every intention to try and take the fight to Janelle de Villiers on the final day, and that's exactly what he did. Bottrell closed the gap to de Villiers with around 2 minutes, meaning that these two cars were quite literally in sight of each other for the last 400 kilometers of the race. But in the end, de Villiers proved that you don't teach an old dog new tricks, as he hung on to claim victory at this most prestigious race, albeit by just 1 minute and 57 seconds in the end. There it is, the standings after 1,000 kilometers here in Uppington, with the name of Els at the top of the Class T board. Schroeder topped a rather busy Class T1 board ahead of Buerta and Blicknort, whilst Baragwanath was victorious in the Class T 1.2s. But the scoreboard that mattered most was this one, the one that shows a clean sweep for Toyota at their home event, with De Villiers coming out on top.
Big thank you to the team. They did a tremendous job the whole weekend. You know, the desert race is always very, very tough. It's the longest race in our championship, but they did a great job. Thanks to them, thanks to Dennis for great navigation, especially this morning. It was quite tricky out there.
And that, as they say, is that. The end of a long and tough but very exciting 2022 Toyota Gazoo Racing SA 1000 Desert Race. For round 3, the South African Rally Raid Championship moves to the borders of Gauteng and Mpumalanga for the Team Hilux Rally Raid Bronkhorstspruit 400 in the town of, you guessed it, Bronkhorstspruit. See you guys out there on the 19th and 20th of August. All this action was brought to you by Ford, Toyota, Pirelli and Gulfstream.